This is a tutorial on how to do character model modding for Metal Gear Rising. So, when I originally recorded this footage, I didn't test my recording with OBS, and it didn't end up capturing the audio. So, now you're going to have to deal with me doing the voiceover and explaining things through what I've already done. So, as you can see here, I'm going to be using the PL1010, which is basically just Raiden's body, and I'm going to be using that to demonstrate how to do character modding. Now, this is going to be relatively simple because I don't want the tutorial to take too long, but it should cover most of the things that you're going to need while character modding. The things I don't cover are more complex techniques like adding physics or doing really specific stuff with the shaders that I either don't know how to do or are not applicable to most situations, or you can't figure out by yourself. That is why I'm going to link a description to the Metal Gear Rising modding server. Link a description, that doesn't make sense. But I'm going to link an invite to the Discord server in the description of this video so that in case you run into any trouble, people can help you with that. So, the first step you're going to be doing is swapping the textures, or at least that's the first step I do. You don't necessarily have to do it, but I find it easier. You're going to do this basically with the same method that I showcased in the texture modding video, but so I have the new textures that I'm going to be using for the solid snake body in this tutorial, and I'm basically showing the different textures. Now, that one that my mouse is hovering over is a texture that has transparency that is transparent when in-game, because normally the textures, the alpha channel on the textures serves as the specular channel, but not for that one, and that texture also does not have a normal map associated with it, which is why I highly suggest using a template mod or using one of the other bodies for Raiden. The prologue body works fine, or personally, I use the Venom Snake template from the Venom Snake mod on Nexus. So right now I'm opening all of the textures in GIMP, which is my program of choice. I find it works best. And then I'm opening a texture that has a specular channel. I'm going over this just because it's difficult to explain to people, and as you can see, through trial and error, I found that the specular channel is most likely the red channel in this texture. So I'm going to be messing with different things, but you're going to want to go to Colors, and then Components, and Decompose. As you can see, I'm going to Colors, Components, Decompose. The color mode RGB, that's a default one. So now I have the red channel. What I'm going to do is apply barely any black to it, because I've worked with these before. If it's completely white and then you do the color to alpha, it'll just make it'll make this channel entirely transparent, which when you transfer it over to the regular texture will remove all of the color data for that, and will just end up showing lots of black spots. So I'm applying the just barely, not even noticeable amount of black to this texture before I go to Colors, Color to Alpha, and then White. And once I do that, I'm going to add a layer mask, like so, and I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go over to the texture that's associated with it, which is this one, and then again, add the layer mask, and then I'm going to press Ctrl V and anchor it down, so now that the transparency is applied to this texture, and then apply the layer mask, and then you're free to export as DDS. I usually, just to keep the original textures, add _MGR to them so I know which textures are the new one. So when you export, make sure that you're either using DTX5 compression with no min maps for your DDS image, or you could export as PNG, which is which I find to be the preferred version. You get higher quality textures. So now I'm going to cut to when I have all the textures converted that way, as well as the normal maps. One thing I will say now is that, again, the base default body Raiden textures have so few textures to work with, and later you'll see that it has so few meshes to work with. I cannot stress this enough, I highly suggest using a template from another mod, or using any body other than the default Raiden one. Most of them are interchangeable by default. So now we're going to be moving on to the actual Blender part of this guide once you've repacked the WTA and WTP, etc. Oh, one thing I like to do is check once the textures are swapped that they're actually applied. So I opened it in Oasis just then, but now I'm going to be importing the model into Blender, and as you can see, the textures are working just fine, but the UV maps aren't. That's just because they're different. So, and then I'm going to import the solid snake model. Alright, now I'm importing the DAE file. And then the first thing I'm going to do is delete the armature. And this one, since it's a Fox Engine mesh, it will rotate 90 degrees. In my experience, most models don't do this, but I've had a handful that do. So then I'm going to move it off to the side, just so that it's easier to work with. The first thing you're going to want to do, once you've imported that, is check to see which textures correlate with which mesh. If you already know this, then that's great, but it's always good to double check. You'll see that later. And then once you do this, once you check which textures are assigned to which mesh, so that you know which to join, you're going to start renaming all of the UV maps to UV map with the capitalization that I have there. UVM capitalized, AP lowercase, and you're going to assign that to all of your meshes. Every single one of them. Alright, now that we have all of the UV maps joined, our next goal is going to be to start combining the different meshes together to minimize the number of meshes as much as possible. Now, you don't want to completely minimize them. There are some exceptions to minimizing the meshes. For example, if you have too many vertex groups on a mesh, it will completely mess with the shading of your model. So what I like to do is have each hand be a separate mesh, the torso be its own mesh, the legs be its own mesh, and then from there any extra accessories, like you can see the gun or the pouches, anything like that. Yeah, as you can see on the default Raiden body, each hand is its own mesh. And that's likely because having too many vertex groups on a single mesh messes with it messes with the shading. And as you can see, mine is split into 5 different segments. is generally how many I have mine split into anyway. But depending on which character you're going to be editing, you're going to have more. And then after this, what you're going to want to do is delete all of the materials. And I don't delete the materials here right now. Right now what I'm doing is going over one way you can do the vertex groups for your new mesh. This is easily the most painful. So as you can see, I have a vertex group selected, and I can see which part of the body it's affecting. I have the left toe and left foot, which I'm going to be using to demonstrate the weight painting process that I use. And then I'm going to select the original mesh and see which bone is associated with that part. So, as you can see, I've found bones 83 and 82, which correlate to the left foot. So, I'm going to rename those vertex groups to bone 83 and bone 82. There are, of course, other ways to do this with automatic weights. There are lots of plugins that help. Sometimes I use those, but with Fox Engine, yeah, as you can see, I'm deleting the materials. But with Fox Engine models, I find this method is the best. It might not be the quickest, so what I'm doing is I'm joining the new mesh with the original, just temporarily. And then once I have it, I'm going to pose the mesh and rotate, or pose the armature and rotate it just to see if what I've done matches up, if the vertex groups are working and they're assigned to the bones. So after you do that, it's very important, you want to Control-Z, unjoin the meshes. You don't want to join the meshes until way later. I'm going over that, Control-Z, 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 as much as possible. Yep. So you're going to want to do that with every bone, or again, use automatic weight painting of some kind. There are plugins that help with this. But all right, now I have pretty much all of the vertex groups transferred over to the new one. This is a mesh that I've worked on previously. I just re-imported the old project that I have, but it's at the same stage of development that we were at earlier, where the UV maps are named UV map, all the textures should work fine, all the vertex groups are fine. The arms are a bit different, but I mean, at the shoulder, you're only going to be adding 1 or 2 vertex groups anyway, so it doesn't necessarily matter too much. And now I'm reviewing all of the data, double checking all of my properties, going through the any variables, but I'm pretty sure I have everything. Now, if you do the automatic weights, remember to do the weights limit total. That's an important one. Or you can transfer weights, as I showed in the previous model modding tutorial about halfway through. And here I'm removing the materials again because I had the materials from earlier. Now, what I'm doing is, okay, so I believe I'm checking now the posing, making sure that works and all that. Double check all the time. So, one thing that's very important, not necessarily important here, is to check your backface culling. I just showed you how to view how to enable backface culling, and as you can see, it makes the back of Raiden's, or the back inside of Raiden's neck completely transparent. This just controls the normals, it shows off which face is facing outward or which face is facing inwards, and thus makes it not visible. This isn't really applicable to most meshes that you're going to be working with, but it's an important thing to take note of. And if your normals are facing the wrong way that you want, then select all and go to Mesh Normals Flip. And as you can see, Raiden looks all weird now. That's because he's basically inside out. So if you have a problem like that, go to flip the normals again. you don't have that. That's usually only an issue with hair or thin meshes. Sunglasses is one that I worked with recently where it had a similar issue. So once you have that done, what you're going to want to do is, I don't think I go over this now, or I am going over this now, but so before you join them, make sure that your new mesh, you have none of the vertices selected. That's an important thing to do. I believe I go over this in my earlier model modding tutorial. But make sure you have none selected on your new mesh and all of them selected on your old mesh, so that you can just delete vertices of your old mesh, and then it works perfectly fine. You don't have any remnants of your old mesh. So I'm not exactly sure what I'm talking about. Oh, I'm talking about how limited the default Raiden body is in terms of textures and meshes. So you can use this arm, but there are some issues that come with it. First of all, it'll make Raiden's sheath look like it's floating. But second, and more importantly, whenever you're doing the charged attack for Raiden, the mesh that you have joined with the Saya Arm Zero will disappear temporarily while you're charging the attack. Even if there are no vertex groups associated with where it is, it just is that way. Now, since I had such a limited amount of meshes, I joined the legs with the body. It's perfectly fine. Legs and body can be joined for most meshes, and then I'm joining the rest of the meshes with the original body. Of course, keeping note of which texture is associated with which mesh. And then this is an interesting one. So, as you can see, that texture had the shader that the original text had. We will get to how to solve that later. But the transparency is visible as actual transparency in-game as opposed to just being the specular map. Now, and then if you have any meshes left over, you are going to want to select all of the vertices except 3. And those 3 have to make a triangle. This is very important. Every single mesh must have 3 vertices, 1 triangle, minimum. So once you have that, you can scale it down and just kind of hide it in the shoulder. And then I believe now it is ready to export. So I'm going to cut to when I do that. Or I guess I won't have to cut. I'll just do it quickly. Export it to your original WMB, and then you should, if you've done everything correctly, should get no error messages. If you do have any error messages, stop what you're doing, save your progress. Save your progress frequently. I suggest doing that after you've joined them, after every major step. So, but if you do run into any errors, go to the Metal Gear Rising modding server and ask them, or double check your UV maps, any material properties that you might have had earlier, any vertex groups that are named anything but bone and then the number right after. If you have any of those, get rid of them, make sure they're normalized. Suggest UV map or UV map 2. Or in some cases, there's, one other. I go over it in my regular modding tutorial. Once you do that, you're going to pack your files, put them in your PL folder, or open them through RMM, and then open your game. So what I'm doing right now is opening the mesh in Noesis just to see if it loads fine. If Noesis crashes, that's usually a very bad thing, but sometimes it pans out just fine. But sometimes the textures won't appear correctly in Noesis. That's just because it's fussy whenever loading textures. I don't think it will load PNGs, but that's fine anyway. The best way to check is with Metal Gear Rising. Now, if Metal Gear Rising crashes, that's very bad. So, as you can see, the model looks mostly fine. Now, the head is completely black. That's just because those are loaded from a different mod. Your head should look like the regular Raiden head, hair, visor, assuming your game is unmodded. The reason it's black is because there are no textures associated with this mesh. So here I turned down the music because I think it's too loud. I was probably right, but in retrospect it doesn't matter. I'm surprised that this audio came through, but my microphone audio didn't come through in the settings. I don't know. OBS is weird. But anyway, you can see the large parts of mesh floating to the sky. That is a weight paint issue. Now, if you have done the weight paints with care, as opposed to just dragging them over from another project like I did, your weight paints should look fine. If they don't, you either need to go in Blender and limit the total number of weights per vertex group, or what you can do is figure out if there are no weight paints associated with that vertex. But generally speaking, it'll be fine. Alright, so again, I'm showcasing the weird weight painting. That's just because I didn't scale it with the skeleton properly, and just because I didn't put the proper care that this game needs. Now, one other thing I'm going to suggest, you don't necessarily need to do this, but it helps sometimes, is if you darken the textures, there will be less bloom on the model, which the bloom in Metal Gear Rising sucks because the lighting sucks because this whole freaking game engine. So anyway, as you can see, the knife and the gun are transparent. This is where we go to fix that. I'm zooming in, and they also don't have any normal maps. This is where you wouldn't necessarily have this problem if... Jeez. You wouldn't necessarily have this problem if you used a template earlier, but now I'm going to show you what happens in case it is transparent, or in case you have a missing normal map. Now, on the Metal Gear Rising modding server, there already is a better tutorial on how to create a new texture association, a new material in Blender. That's going to be better than what I have here. So what I'm going to do is go to the Materials tab, scroll all the way down to Custom Properties, and then once I have that open, you're going to see the shader name here, which is Civ23SBXXX. I'm going to go select a different mesh, the one that you're normally going to be using for most materials is OSIS00XBEX. If you want to use a different shader, one that has better reflectivity, one that is transparent, one that is, I don't know, just looks different, you're going to want to select a model that has that texture. So as you can see, I pasted that shader name into the mesh that I originally had. So now the transparency should work as a specular map and not as actual transparency. So you saw I was hovering over albedo map 0, albedo map 1, normal map 4. Those are those control what textures are associated with this. The normal map is obviously a normal map, albedo map is just your basic color map. So as you can see, that is 1529, which is 1529 over in the WTP folder that I have, and it's right there. So if you want to change the textures of a material, this is how you do that. You would just copy the name of the texture that you have over here and place it in the proper albedo map area that you want to have. And then the same applies to normal maps. So, now that I have that done, I'm going to go over what this zone does. This controls the colors of the mesh, as well as the texture. So, you have R, G, and B going from top to bottom, and then alpha down there at the bottom. I'm not sure what changing alpha does, but if you increase the red, for example, your mesh will appear to be more red. If you increase green, it'll be more green. If you increase blue, like I'm doing here, it will increase how blue your mesh looks. Now, I've heard and seen demonstrated from another great modder, Leo Feroz, that if you decrease all the red, white, or R, G, and B, it will decrease the amount of bloom that you have on the mesh. But in practice, with testing some other meshes, we don't know how well that works, and I believe that just darkening the textures of your mesh is going to be easier anyway and more reliable. So now that I have that done, I'm opening up Metal Gear Rising, and you'll see the effects of changing the shader and changing the blue. Alright, so as you can see, your blade and your gun are no longer transparent wherever the alpha channel is. They are just straight up solid color, with the specular channel being controlled by the alpha channel. However, there is no normal map, and that is why I suggest either creating a new material, which you can do, or by using a template earlier. So, that is all you need. That is all the information that you need to make a decent character model mod. There are more complicated techniques, such as adding physics bones, but I just don't know how to do that. But I've demonstrated to you how to port a model poorly. That's because I didn't put the attention and care into creating a character model mod that you need to have. But, like I said, you should have all of the information now to create a decent model mod. If you need any help, again, join the Metal Gear Rising modding server, and there are lots of people there that will be very glad to help you. I, for one, will be there. Leo Feroz, like I said, the best model modder out there. He's happy to help. He has his own guides. Not as good as mine, I'll say, but he has his own guides. Yeah, that should be everything you need.